Здравствуйте! 20 лет – это мой путь к русско-английской школе в Лондоне. Глубоко личная идея с годами переросла в создание коллективного творчества многих людей, разных языков, национальностей и культур. Знакомьтесь,
Здравствуйте, bonjour. My guest today is Jean-Marc Dewaele, Professor of Applied Linguistics and Multilingualism at Birkbeck, University of London. His research interests include effects of multilingualism and multiculturalism on personality and emotion, child's bilingual development, foreign language learning and teaching and motivation, and complex relationship between language, emotion, and identity and psychotherapy. Jean-Marc has been teaching for many years, published hundreds literally of research papers. Among his written work are books, columns in various academic journals, contributions to encyclopedias. He's a member of different scientific organizations and editorial boards and academic selection committees in the UK and abroad. And he's a very big advocate of multilingualism, my former teacher, inspiring and fun always, and therefore indirect contributor to the creation of the London's Russian-English Bilingual School, the place where we're meeting today. Welcome. Jean-Marc, thank you very much for coming. Let's start with your own background and family. How many languages did you speak both? You've always been multilingual. Your linguistic and cultural background, how did you come to London and your journey to multilingualism?
Well, I grew up speaking French with my parents in Bruges, in Flanders, in Belgium. And so I was using Dutch outside the house and French only with my brother and sister and my parents. And I remember that a lot of my friends thought that was very weird because they were speaking Dutch with their parents, or at least the local dialect. And they couldn't understand why we were speaking another language at home. And I thought it was rather... It felt normal to me, but I was surprised that it didn't seem normal to other people. And in fact, I would say that that insight has stayed with me ever since and has clearly also influenced my choice of career and my research interests. I think you need to have experienced bilingualism in order to feel the fire to investigate what this is, this strange phenomenon, and why it is that people have weird opinions about bilingualism. And that happens everywhere in the world, because everybody thinks that they know best, even though they may not have studied linguistics or in fact know very little about bilingualism. But since everybody speaks a language, and may have learned a few words in another language, they tend to think that they have specialist knowledge on the topic. And these are usually people that can be a bit hard to handle. I typically find them in my first year BA class, and then I need to help them get rid of some linguistic prejudices.
Okay, and how did you come to London?
Oh, I finished my doctorate at Free University of Brussels, and I was looking for a job anywhere. And in fact, I heard from the then professor of applied linguistics at Birkbeck that the French department was looking for somebody with a specialization in second language acquisition. And since my doctorate was on the acquisition of French as a second language, I applied, and I was lucky to get the job. And my wife agreed that London is a nice city, and we liked the parks, and we liked the British eccentricity, and there were plenty of things that we liked about the British and British culture, and we loved London. So it was a good choice. So that was 26 years ago.
That was 26 years ago. So do you think it's always hard or easy to move cultures? I guess the correct word would be acculturation.
Oh, I think...
Was it hard for you?
Not too hard. I would not... I mean, we did not go through a period of culture shock, because that can happen when the cultures are really very different. It was more tension. It was tension rather than shock. We were eternally surprised when British people talked about Europe as if they weren't part of it. And it only got worse recently.
No, yes, of course.
Though they still play in the Euros. So they aren't entirely systematic in their behavior. But no, I think we adapted quite easily. And I think you adapt by noticing things sometimes unconsciously. Like I realized in my first weeks at Birkbeck that I was shaking hands too often with my colleagues. Nobody told me, but because Belgians typically shake hands every day. Yeah. You know, you see your colleague in the morning, you shake hands, and if it's a lady, you give a peck on the cheek, and that's normal behavior in Belgium. And here I noticed that my British colleagues wanted to hide their hands. And I thought, that's interesting. Maybe I'm shaking hands too often. So I stopped shaking hands. And then the other thing I realized at the first staff reception, I was talking to Patrick Pollard, who was head of the French department. And I realized that he was taking a step back as we were chatting. And I took a step forward. Yes. And he took another step back. And I took another step forward. And so we crossed the whole room, and I thought, why is this guy walking away from me? Because this is a quite noisy little room, and why is he walking away? And then I discovered, of course, I'm invading his private space. Because in Belgium, it is okay to stand at half an arm length distance of your interlocutor. Here, it is really an arm length. So if you're standing too close, people get uncomfortable. And then a couple of years ago, I may have told you the anecdote when you were in my class. I was at a reception back in Brussels, talking to old friends, and suddenly I realized that I could smell the peanuts on the breath of one of my friends. And I thought, ooh, how unpleasant. And I took half a step back, and he took half a step forward, and I took half a step back. And then I realized, oh, damn, I turned into a Brit. So those are things that's acculturation for you, things that
Culture
happen.
Shift.
Well, yes, it's a shift in your non-verbal behavior. You adapt to the behavior of the people around you. And so it takes a little while when I'm in Belgium to get back into the handshaking and the kissing and the standing close by, etc. But I would say that I've become a kind of a cultural hybrid, and I'm perfectly happy with that. It's okay.
I think it's normal. This is what happens to, I guess, most people.
And I guess also that I have become a very typical British professor in the sense that I express my agreement or disagreement in a very British way, which I discover in PhD defenses in European countries that is quite different from what they do.
How different?
Well, the British academics can be pretty direct in what I think is a friendly, constructive way, but we can say that this doesn't work. And my French and Spanish colleagues would never be so direct. Although the British are known to be indirect, yet in academia, especially at Vivas, you can be pretty direct. But then the Vivas is a small private affair, whereas in Europe it is a public spectacle with friends and family and a big jury, and so you're not expected to be too critical.
Yes, I think it used to be like, or it is like that in some other countries as well.
Yes.
Maybe. Okay. So you have been living in England for 26 years. 26 years. You got a successful career, with English being your second or third? Third language. And you speak Spanish as well?
Fourth.
Okay, fourth. So does it bother you? Has it ever bothered you that English your second language?
No, not at all. I realized, well, I always loved English, though my English wasn't particularly good, but I remember in high school reading Tolkien, first in Dutch and then in the original version, and I thought, what a beautiful language. And there was so much more literature available in English than in Dutch or in French. So I loved reading in English. And I realized then that I would probably never sound like a British person, but that was okay with me because I feel Belgian, and hence I was proud of my identity, and I didn't mind that people would, still ask me, oh, where are you from? And then I say, from London. And they say, yeah, but where are you really from? So, well, really from Belgium, but we've been in London for 26 years, and people say, oh, okay. And it's not a hostile question. It's a kind of, they hear a foreign accent and hence they want to know.
The people are sensitive, I think. Quite a few people are sensitive. It's
something that people are curious, and that's okay. I'm curious too, but I'm very careful because, in fact, it can be, I'm white male, so I could pass for a British person, right? It is more sensitive if you are non-white and you have an accent and people ask you where you are from. That could be perceived as borderline racist. So it's in fact, everything to do with languages and bilingualism and multilingualism is always linked to politics, to identity, to belonging, and hence it's always potentially conflictual.
Absolutely, and actually bilingual education as well. So you have a daughter, and you used to mention her all the time in your lectures.
I probably overdid.
Yes, she was only 2 or 3 at the time, I think.
Yeah.
And
I was a very proud dad.
A very proud dad of someone who embarked on a journey of multilingualism for your child. Tell us about this journey, how hard it was. Tell me how it is like, well, for you, your experience, for a London person who tried to, very determined to bring your child multilingually. How was it?
Oh, I would say that within the family there was no problem at all. My wife and I both speak French and Dutch. My wife's first language is Dutch. We typically communicate in Dutch, but her French is perfect. So we decided that she would speak Dutch to Livia, I would speak French to her, and since Livia was born in London, she had English all around her. She always went to English-speaking schools. I did send her to a French club also to
yes,
because I realized that French was in fact the relatively weaker language of the three, and she was happy with her three languages. I asked her to write about it, of course, as she grew up. So
yes, of course, as applied linguist.
Of course. So I think at the age of 10 and 12, and again at 16, she wrote little blogs about the fact that she enjoyed being multilingual, and that it was never a problem for her, though it was a problem sometimes in, say, the eyes of was it the health visitor who visited us and to check on her health when she was I think she was 3 years old or something, and the health visitor heard us speak French and said, "What? Are you speaking French with your child?" I say, "Yes, I speak French with her, but my wife speaks Dutch with her." And as you have noticed, her English is perfectly okay. She says, "Oh, you shouldn't." I said, "Why are you saying this?" "Oh, English should be enough." I said, "Well,
really? Well, how many years ago was that? Because things have changed.
That was in '99.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that was
So but then I got really angry. I said, "Well, you shouldn't be saying this thing. That's complete rubbish, complete and utter rubbish." I happen to have a PhD in applied linguistics and multilingualism, and there is absolutely no evidence for what you are claiming. Children can grow up with multiple languages and they don't suffer from their multilingualism. And so that's why I used to talk about it a bit too much in my classes, using my daughter as just an illustration of one child growing up with three languages who consistently managed to beat the English monolingual kids in her class in English. So she consistently had the highest scores for English. So the two other languages were not problematic. On the other hand, I would say that the other languages turned her into a linguist from the start. The moment a child realizes that there are other languages, they start to compare, to make connections, and they turn into linguists. Whether they may not realize it, but the realization that you may have completely different words or concepts in two languages that might be translated but that are not completely overlapping, that's a profound insight.
I think they used to compare cultures as well,
of course,
or cultural discourses from early age, and
absolutely.
that's very interesting.
And I think Livia was very proud of her Belgian identity because it made her stand out a little bit. That said, she was in a primary school where, and even before that, she's always been surrounded by multilingual people. So she was never awed. Had she been the only multilingual in a very monolingual environment, but that's the reason we like London so much, because she had Chinese, Turkish friends and all combinations. Although three languages was a bit unusual, but she was very proud of it, and I would say that she remained very proud and feeling very Belgian until the time she went to Belgium to do a sailing course, and she met Flemish teenagers who mocked her for not having an accent belonging to one specific Belgian region. Because my wife and I are from different regions, and so we speak standard Dutch.
Yes, yes.
And so she could not be placed on the dialectical map of Belgium. And so she said, "Where are you from?" And so she said, "Well, I'm from London." London, how weird. And then obviously she was using the Dutch of her parents. She never had much input of her age group from peers in Dutch. So she wasn't using the cool, expressions or swear words, or so she felt that she didn't quite belong. And then she realized that culturally, although she couldn't understand all the references to television programs,
or jokes or cultural
sports references and stuff. So and then she was shocked by how in your face Flemish people are, a bit like the Dutch. So they are quite straightforward. So they would say things like, "Oh, I absolutely hate what you are wearing, but oh, I absolutely love this," and that she found that shocking, and so she came home.
It's a little bit like British academics, then.
Exactly. She came home and she said, "You know, Mum, Dad, I thought I was Belgian. In fact, I realized I have Belgian roots, but I feel more at ease with my British friends, where we can be a bit indirect, and you know, I'm more relaxed with them." And so she, I would say that she's become a British person with strong Belgian roots, and she's proud of her roots. But I think she would rather stay here and have us leave us the house in London, and we can return to Belgium when we retire.
Yes. Okay, we're already speaking about child bilingualism and bilingual development, but I think that this is a subject that, or topic, that are becoming more and more relevant, important for many families around the world, where I guess because the world is becoming more and more mobile. So the title of one of your books is Raising Multilingual Children. I think it was a Colin Baker. There's a Roger. It does still write the Welsh author.
Yes, yes.
Similar?
I don't know whether he's still writing, but I am in touch with him about a journal. Yeah.
Yes. So let's just explore this topic, and basically we've got a few questions that just hear often really from the parents. So in your opinion, what is the key feature of language that parents have to keep in mind embarking on multilingual journey for their children?
Mm-hmm. I would say that the key thing is consistency, so that they decide on a language that they will use with the child and use that consistently for years. And it is impossible to have a system where you decide that you will speak one language on Monday and another language on Tuesday. It doesn't work that way. I think the child needs to connect your voice and your face with a particular language.
So one person, one language approach that is quite famous. You think that's it works?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good approach. It doesn't mean that you need to adhere to it overly strictly. It means that it's okay, for example, to deviate from that rule if there are other kids around and you want them to hear what you are telling your child. Then I would tell something in English to Livia, and then her friends would hear, say, you know, don't come home after 5 o'clock, or we expect you home at 5. That would be said to her so that the others have heard. But if it was a private comment, it could be, n'oublie pas ton argent, because that's then something that the others weren't supposed to hear. So she understood quite well that we functioned in English, but that we preferred to use French with our language with her. And as she came home from school, we were not too strict either in expecting her to tell us in our language what had happened at school. So, you know, because it was typically something that the teacher had said and then a friend answered, and so it would have been ridiculous to expect her to translate that into French. So she could tell us the story in English, and then we could have a conversation about it in another language. That seemed to make sense. So I think you can, it's good to stick to the principle, but without being overly strict that they end up rebelling against it.
Yes.
Because then you've pushed too far, and then in fact you lose it. Because at that point they might just refuse to use your language anymore.
This approach I think really works, especially for small children.
Yes.
Of course, when they're teenagers,
they know
with
teenagers
that
it becomes slightly different.
We've been recommending with Svetlana, one of the founders and governors, the same thing to our parents as well over the years, and it does work. It does work. So what is the best environment for languages to thrive? That's what I'm trying to get at. It's what the factor, what the feature of language, I mean the social aspect of its side, or that the social nature of language that is important clearly? Sure,
it's social, it's affective, it it's cultural. So I remember that, well, I think one of the strategies that I used to keep Livia interested in French was reading to her every night. I think I did that until she was well into her teenagerhood. It was the thing that was accepted, and so we went through lots of fun books in French, and it was a source of complex linguistic material, words that she had never heard, or tenses that you don't use in spoken language.
Yeah.
And so you could see her soak it up, you know, she was really in the story, and then we would discuss the story afterwards, and you know, what would happen today and what would happen to him or her, and she really enjoyed that. And in fact, we both enjoyed it. It was a bonding experience, and I think that it strengthened her interest in French, and in fact may explain why later on she decided to go and study French at university.
Yes, I'm sure. So language and culture, is language
Yes.
always embedded in culture? And the question really is, it's difficult to teach culture in a classroom environment. I mean, you can't, I can't imagine you can actually teach culture. You can acquire it, you can maybe, yes, just find circumstances so the child gets immersed in culture. But what to do for people who find it difficult to travel, maybe their language or community language and culture simply far away, or we're in a situation of COVID that you cannot travel. Yes, this is one of the, I guess, books and reading maybe.
Well, language and culture are linked, so it's really hard to disentangle the effect of language and culture. Mm-hmm. So I think any language, that there is always a cultural element to language, because simply by describing something happening in front of you, you have to make linguistic choices which are linked to cultural things. And you don't realize that they are linked to cultural things, and because they don't stand out as being cultural. So how do you describe somebody entering a house? Well, depending on whether you are a Russian speaker or a German speaker or a French speaker, you will pay attention to different aspects of that process, and so you will tell that slightly differently. If you do it in a foreign language, you might do it wrongly, and people might say, why are you saying this? You know, that's not something you would usually mention or say. Why is it important to mention that? So that's a cultural thing. And then obviously in Iran, for example, you know, they teach English, but they hate everything to do with America and English, so they try to filter out all the culture and infuse it with Iranian culture, so that it is learning English in Iranian, which is kind of weird. And then they realize that, of course, teaching somebody a language that is accessible on the internet, etc., is in fact opening doors and windows that they then try to shut, but it's too late.
It is weird. It reminds me of the situation, I think, in some of the states of America, where they have bilingual schools, and some schools they're not really bicultural. They're bilingual, but they're not bicultural, so they have to follow the American curriculum in both languages. And sometimes it's just absurd. You know, you have to find, the Spanish English program, they have to find the reference or story about whatever village in Spain, but there has to be in English or something. It's really,
Well, I guess the children quickly get the tensions that the adults have about the different languages and cultures, so they can joke about it.
So what is the best age to start learning or acquiring another language? And this is a very common question. There's so many. Birth, yes, pre-birth. I think you mentioned
maybe I made jokes about pre-birth. Yes, that's right. I started speaking French to Livia before she was born. That's true.
So do we. Okay, but the younger the better, because there's not really consistency in this.
There is consistency about that younger is better if it is not formal instruction. So it means that if you start a language with your child, you should start with one language from birth and then keep on using it. The situation is slightly different with early is better in education, because children who have 1 or 2 hours of a foreign language at age 3 or 4 typically don't benefit much from it, and compared to kids who start at age 12 or even 14, by the age of 18, those who started later typically have completely either overtaken the ones who started early, or there is no difference anymore.
Okay. And critical periods, I remember there was a
well,
phrase,
that's
critical
the thing.
pronunciation and accent? No?
Yes, there is a lot of debate on that. We no longer call it critical period, but more age effects. So that the younger people who start younger typically have the accent that is indistinguishable from the people who started with the first language. But there is a lot of variation and there is a lot of controversy around that, so I wouldn't make too much of it. So, but it means that in fact you can start a foreign language age 12 and become very fluent in that foreign language. But you could start age 6 and also become very fluent in that language. Everything depends how much input you get in the language. That's really the big thing, that if a child doesn't get much input in a language, that language will not flourish much. So it will remain like a small plant. If you give it a lot of water and sunlight, and then it will grow and expand, and then it will be a true language.
Yes, that's a good analogy. So how would you encourage the child to read and write in another language, especially living in the country with English being the majority language? So for example, England or America. Yes.
Well, I think parents should be realistic in that their child will soak up the majority culture around them. And that's the language they use with their friends, so that's the friends they share books with, or go watch films or listen to music. So all you can try and preserve some enjoyable linguistic activities, and I think like reading to your child in your home language, or watching a film together with your child in the home or the minority language, that's probably the best strategy.
Okay.
And then obviously take the child to your home country, so that they can chat with the grandparents or with their family members, or make friends in that language.
And for the cultural immersion, of course.
And for the cultural immersion, that helps. But it's not a guarantee. And what works for one child might very well not work for another child for some reason that is hard to know. So a lot
of individual differences
in
language.
There are huge individual differences. Yeah.
Okay. I think we all agree, people who speak or use their languages, or different more than one language in their life, we all mix languages and code switch, and then kind of it's natural, because it's impossible to express your own self and in one language if you're living in a different country surrounded by different languages. But I believe that's called code switching. So this is something that some parents find it painful. They code switch all the time themselves, but they try to stick to non-code switching environment for their children. What can you say about that?
I myself used to code switch very little talking to Livia, but then I would code switch with my wife between French and Dutch and English. So it meant that Livia was getting sufficient input in French, but she was also observing that code switching was perfectly fine. And so she would code switch, you know, saying something to my wife in Dutch and then something to me in French and then tell her something in English about what happened at school. And we all thought that was absolutely normal. And then I remember one of her friends, a monolingual British kid, sitting at the kitchen table and saying, "But what are you guys?" and then I may have told you the anecdote because my wife said, "Oh, we're Belgians." And Livia says, "No, I'm not Belgian." And then she must have been, I don't know, 4 years old. And my wife says, "Yes, you have a Belgian passport." And, you know, a 3-year-old of Belgian passport. I said, "No, no, no." And the friend Laura says, "So Livia, what are you then?" And I thought, wow, a profound question for, you know, such a young child. What am I? And you could see her think, and she said, "I am a London girl." Because those were, in fact, she was very proud of being a girl and of being a Londoner. And that local identity mattered more than, you know, some abstract nationality. And I thought, oh, what a wonderful thing to say. So I wrote that down and I included it in my book. Yes.
Yes, it's amazing stories from coming from the parents who bring up their children multilingually. My daughter used to come to our nursery and she heard probably Russian more than, you know, English and French, and she could. So when she started English school, on the next day she came back. She said, "Oh, Mom, I understand now. They speak not just Russian in this country, but English as well." Yes.
Children bring in.
Yes, children bring
in. They are good observers. So what I would say is that code switching is never a problem. And that the argument that children who code switch are unable to keep their languages apart, that's a false claim. That's absolutely not true. If the children are code switching, it is because they feel that it's okay to code switch.
But also code switching is not about just lexical gaps.
No.
It's about loads of different things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So one of the studies I did, we discovered that in fact it is people who are highly proficient in their different languages who are most likely to switch between these languages.
Yes, I remember.
So you could occasionally, you know, switch because you can't find a word in one language, but in fact that's pretty rare. You typically switch because it is a way to show common identity with your interlocutor.
The humor,
absolutely.
Loads of
And so I noticed when Livia met Laura for the very first time, and she was still producing only 1 or 2 words, you know, aged 1.5. And she was using her little French and Dutch words with Laura, and noticed that Laura didn't react when she heard these French and Dutch words, but she reacted to the English little words. So by the second visit of Laura, I noticed that Livia switched to only her English little words. She had understood that Laura wasn't reacting to Dutch and French, and hence that English was the only language to use with her. And so she stuck to English with the friend. And I thought, wow, okay, great. I mean, it means that even a very young child realizes, this language doesn't work with that person, but it works fine with that person and with that person. And I can switch between them there, but not here.
Yes.
So they are able to get in the monolingual mode if necessary.
Absolutely. Sometimes it does happen often with the grandparents.
Absolutely.
When you all of a sudden you code switch and you go back to, you know, your culture, different culture and language, and you start speaking to the monolingual grandparents, and children understand it. It just instantly they remember that.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Is multilingualism normal in the world today? Are there more people multilingual or not really? Is it the norm? What is norm?
Yeah, no, I think it is the norm. Multilingualism is the norm in the world. But there is an opposing monolingual ideology where people typically politicians claiming that in order to have national unity, there should be only one language. And that's true in many countries around the world. And so they then kind of pretend that these other languages don't exist and that it might even be a threat to national unity. So it's an ideological matter, and it's one that I combat with fervor.
So advantages of languages and multilingualism. Clearly, the advantages, individual and for the society in general. I think there's a common, well-established belief that languages are good for you, and you hear that all the time. Even monolingual people say, "Yeah, language is good for you." So
depends what languages.
Yes, absolutely. That's a good thing. There'll be another interview. Yes, absolutely. French is okay in England.
Yeah. So it is about elite bilingualism. Like it's great to pay a lot of money for your kid to learn a prestige language, but not okay for your kid to pick up a non-prestige language from a neighbor, for example. And it's ridiculous because it's just as beneficial for the child to learn another language. Doesn't matter what language it is.
No,
really.
Yes, absolutely. I was I'm still surprised, but I had a bit of a culture shock when I first came to this country. That was probably about 30 years ago, and when my first child was born. I was just shocked to find out that there's no language immersion nurseries, not just in Russian, but other languages. I thought, what? I mean, the Asian, with Punjabi and Hindu community is massive. There are millions of people. Why? Why, aren't any bilingual schools or nurseries? There was a culture shock. I was still recovering from it.
That ideology lives on because there is this thought that if you don't use the language of the state language at home, that somehow your child will never integrate in society, which is total crap, of course, but a lot of people believe in this.
Believe in that. So, so there's social, cognitive and cultural gain and advantages. Your own research looks very interesting. So one of the, I'm just looking at a few of your articles, does multilingualism shape personality? And the model, apparently you found that there is a correlation between the level of multilingualism and flexibility, social initiative and open-mindedness. Acculturation, you write, is stressful, but the experience of having to fit in and being in contact with different languages and cultural strength, cultural empathy and open-mindedness. So Losif, I just want you to tell just a little bit, tell us about it, or your findings about, the advantages. Really.
Yeah. So we do find these effects, but statistically they are relatively small. So we should not claim too much, but it is obvious that a child who hears multiple languages, is familiar with different cultural traditions, they understand that there is not a single truth in the world, that there is not a single word in the world.
Philosophy
exactly.
for children.
Absolutely. I think that is a really crucial point, that you realize that in fact when mom says she's mad or happy, it doesn't mean exactly the same than when dad says he's happy or mad in his language. And that's a profound insight, that words that may look more or less equivalent, in fact, have their unique shades and connotations and colors. And children who realize that, okay, well, there was this experiment in Canada where monolingual and bilingual kids were asked whether a little dog raised by a family of ducks, whether he would bark or whether he would acquire, what is it again that the ducks do? I forget. But the thing is that the bilingual kids were more likely to accept that if a duck grew up with dogs or a dog grew up with ducks, they would acquire the language of the family. Whereas the monolingual kids stuck to essentialist thinking and say, no, a dog can only bark, never mind whether he grows up with ducks, and vice versa. So that shows that children who are bi or multilingual accept that there can be unusual things in the world. And that, I think, is profoundly important for them as when they grow up as people.
So what are the main advantages of being multilingual, bilingual? Of course, if you when you're speaking to a parent who maybe try to raise a child multilingually but not sure, and it does happen in multilingual families actually, in fact, often, or one of the parents not sure, or if you speak to a politician, your local MP, if you start argument from, if you invest in languages in your part of London, we'll have more cultural empathy, then I don't think there's a very persuasive argument, although it would be for me. But if you say, if the more people here speak languages, that will boost the economy or bring more money. So there's a direct, instant, a link to to that. There will be different things. So what are the main advantages?
Well, bilingualism, multilingualism can be an economic advantage. So it is true. It depends on the kind of languages you speak. But then languages that may not seem very prestigious right now could in fact be very useful later. I'm thinking
post-Brexit time?
After 9/11, suddenly America discovered that they didn't have sufficient spies who knew Arabic. Right? So suddenly Arab, English bilinguals were very much in demand and got well-paid jobs in intelligence. So knowing languages is useful, especially because if relatively little effort is required for the child to acquire a language pretty easily. So I would say it's a wasted opportunity if parents have languages that they don't pass on to their children. I think parents should really pass on their language and their cultures to their children and not be frightened by people saying, your child won't integrate. The child will not become a superhuman because he or she knows multiple languages. So again, these psychological benefits
or cognitive.
They won't become smarter because they are multilingual. So it is important not to not to exaggerate or to create unrealistic expectations. And then, as Colin Baker in his book says, the parents need to be like gardeners, so that their child's languages is really like a garden. So it needs to be watered, it needs to be fed, it needs to have sufficient sunlight. And sometimes it will be a cactus garden, sometimes it will grow into something lush with lots of flowers, but it will end up being very different even between siblings, where typically the oldest child will have the best knowledge of the minority language of the parents, and the younger children typically have typically don't use that minority language as much as their older siblings.
Not always, it depends how much time.
It is a general rule in bilingual families. There are a couple of books on that. Typically because the school language interferes, and the older child, the younger siblings typically use the school language more with their older siblings. So then the minority language use goes down in the home. It's the so-called sibling effect. So again, it's something that parents shouldn't worry about it too much, because that's life.
The next part of or topic of the interview is something that very dear to my heart, close to my heart, is foreign language teaching and bilingual education in this country. The British Council just published their annual survey report of language teaching in primary and secondary schools in England, Language Trends 2021. So these are literally just a few weeks ago. So these are the main findings, the headline findings. So language teaching are suspended at 1 in 5 primary schools in January due to COVID. The impact has been felt more acutely in deprived areas. As a further result of COVID-19, 64% of responding primary schools and 38% of state secondary schools have no international activities within their school, a huge increase on previous years. Teachers in state secondary schools report that 2 in 5 pupils in key stage 3, that's secondary age, did not engage with language learning during the first national lockdown, leading to time lost to language learning for a lot of pupils. There have been a large decline in the number of pupils that entered for GCSEs and A-level in other modern languages. In addition, no surprise to me, but most schools do not collaborate with or promote Saturday complementary schools. And for me, it's a best kept secret for loads of people in this country is how many Saturday complementary schools in all languages there are, or facilitate the teaching of community languages, while it's the students of these specialist schools who often wish to take GCSEs or A-level in these languages. Yet, languages have been statutory compulsory in Key Stage 2 since 2014. So, since I've been live here, I've been living for many years, I've heard the same story. The government is actually committed. Everyone agreed that languages are good for you. But for some reason, on the ground, in practice, it's not happening. It's just getting worse. And of course, the post-Brexit time now, you get an additional problem with visas. And how many schools have been employing European teachers here? Not just bilingual schools, there are very few bilingual schools, but state schools. This is a big problem. What to do? So what is in your view on this? What can be done and it should be done by the government not to improve the situation? Or is it something that really depends on the kind of history or how the English language developed, the status of English language? What's your view on it?
I think it's a complex problem. It's partly to do with politics and monolingual ideologies and the myth of the superiority of English. It's everybody in the world learns English as a foreign language, so why should we bother teaching a foreign language to our children? So in theory, yes, we want them to speak a little French, but in fact, they don't really care too much. So I think that's one problem. And I think that parents and children themselves pick up these negative attitudes and reproduce them because that's what it's in the air. So it's hard to go against what is in the air. And then I think that there is probably also a problem in the teaching of foreign languages. What I heard from Livia was sometimes appalling, and she was in good schools, and I couldn't quite believe it when I think aged 15 she came home with friends, and so they had French for 3 years, and I remember them coming into the corridor of the house, and I said, "Bonsoir les filles, ça va?" And her friends looked at me, and your dad is speaking French to me. So, and they couldn't answer. And I said, well, you know, you could just say, ça va, and that would be enough. That would be a kind of a minimal exception. I don't know whether I actually said that or not, but I didn't want to embarrass Olivia too much. She was already embarrassed, you know, this dad who speaks French too. But I thought, I mean, 3 years of French, and they cannot, you know, give a simple answer to what is a really basic little routine in French. Comment ça va? The answer, ça va. I thought, 3 years of French? Come on. And then you realize that these people who have had many more years of French aren't able to have a simple conversation. So I think, what are these people doing in their language classes? And then I hear that sometimes the French class happened in English. And they barely heard any French, so they had worksheets and boring stuff. And then the students disengaged. I mean, don't actually absorb any cultural information, don't have any fun in class. And I think that's where you come in. If you can create, if you have a bilingual school where activities actually happen in the language and they are embodied, so that, you know, you talk about something and the object is there, or you do something and it gives the children much more opportunity to absorb the language multimodally, not just something on a bloody worksheet. Yeah, it makes sense. You can do something. It's a tool. It's not just something that the teacher is vaguely talking about.
Well, my children used to come home, and they were supposed to be learning Spanish. That was an English state school. And quite often, there was the one day, he came back from school, Mum, it's so boring.
Exactly.
I never take a language GCSE A level.
Exactly.
And I try to calm her down and say, look, you've been learning Russian through, you know, immersion and sat at a school, don't, you know, exaggerate. But this is really boring. But funny that in the report of the British Council report I just mentioned, it all said that it's a very similar experiences. In schools where uptake at A level has increased, the following comments as to why are typical: cultural capital, excellent promotion of language as a skill, advice regarding taking a language along with another discipline such as law or medicine at university, word of mouth and parental security as regards the quality of teaching, and enjoyment of the cultural aspects, films, trips, high quality literature, teaching, and potential to spend time study abroad. And that was from the teacher of an independent school. And of course the state school haven't got that much, you know, resources. And this is very, you know, corresponds to what you're saying. So what would be your first improvement in teaching L2, say in a mainstream secondary school, if somebody just asked you tomorrow to become head teacher or a governor, and you obviously committed to languages, but you know there's very little funding, you know that probably they we have to concentrate on core subjects, and the core subjects is always maths and English. So what would you do? And post-Brexit times when you can't easily employ
I think the crucial thing would be to combat the idea that you need to spend a lot of time learning grammar rules or learning vocabulary lists. I think that kills it for the kids. So I think the teaching should be real, should be fun, and I think so there needs to be probably a rethink of the national curriculum, where there is too much emphasis on written language and dry stuff. Languages are exciting, so you need to make them exciting. So it means that you need to offer material to the kids that speaks to them. So it needs to be, I don't know, if they are teenagers, you know, have them write love letters rather than...
I'll just talk about love letters, yes.
Yeah, rather than, you know, write about dry topics they don't really care about. Have them talk about things that they find important rather than things that the teachers or the curriculum things are important. I discovered that teaching French to university students, you know, I wanted to talk about the serious political topics of the day, etc. They weren't interested in that, but I had to make them talk. So it turned out that they were really interested in gossiping about who had been drunk at the party, who had been going out with who, and I thought, okay, that's not my favorite topic, but if I can get them to speak about that, at least they will use French, and that was my job, and so that's fine. So I think you could do the same thing with 12-year-olds, talk to them about things that matter to them, allow them also, because I worked a lot on foreign language enjoyment and anxiety and boredom, and things that students enjoy is where they have some degree of autonomy, where the teacher tells them, okay, well, prepare this for me and you have 10 minutes and, you know, I want you to do some role play or some interview or something where you have time on your own, you can organize yourself. These are typically the things that kids enjoy. And if they enjoy their class, not surprisingly, they do better at tests too. And they're more likely to go on studying the language. And if you don't do that, then you have the disappointing thing that, you know, they were bored and then they got a bad score for a test and then they gave up. And then they bought the argument that, oh, foreign languages are so difficult. And
so yes, they're talking about motivation. That's very interesting, motivational factors. I remember your favorite joke used to be, oh, the best motivation is horizontal motivation. It's not very politically correct. I have to cut this out. But meaning if you fall in love and you have that connection with someone, you know, just go and get yourself a Spanish girlfriend, a Spanish partner if you want to learn Spanish. There's really profound truth in it.
Yeah, but the thing is that motivate. You can also fall in love with a book, or a film, or an author, or even a singer. And a lot of our students at Birkbeck who study Korean have fallen in love with the Korean music scene. And they find that so fantastic that they want to learn more. Or they've fallen in love with Murakami and they want to study Japanese. So that's great. So in fact, culture, well-presented culture can be very seductive, very attractive, very fascinating, and kids love it. So it's just a matter of packaging the language well enough so that they will end up learning the grammar without being bored about it. That, you know, well, if you want to write a convincing love letter, then, you know, you need to make sure that you get the tenses right, otherwise the person addressing it will think that it's something of the past, and you're talking about the future, so you need to get the tense right.
There will be a question about declaring love, I think. Okay, so one of what are other types, motivational factors in foreign language?
I would say the teacher being enthusiastic. I mean, the teacher having the skills, obviously, but being enthusiastic and being able to create trust and group solidarity so that nobody feels foolish for making a mistake, or nobody gets humiliated or fear for you know, saying something or mispronouncing something. So that there is trust that, you know, everybody is together in this, and the teacher is not almighty and all-knowing, yet together we can do something, and this is going to be fun. And if students have fun, then they lose their inhibitions and then they join in. And you know, I'm telling you this, but I'm sure you know.
Yeah, but this is about any language. It's about your own language teaching, you know, English or you know,
it's about any language. In fact, it's about any teaching, I would say, because I also teach karate. I may have mentioned that in the past. Well, it's the same thing. You know, you start and you are stumbling, but that's okay. You know, if you are a beginner, it's okay to stumble. Don't feel bad about it. If you do one thing right, you say, oh, you did that one thing right. You know, that's a good start.
No,
and it's the same with languages and foreign languages. You applaud people for the little things that they start doing right, and you say, oh, if you do that right, then soon you will do more things right, and before you know it, you'll do almost everything right. Or at least you will be able to use this language and people will understand you. Isn't that wonderful? And does it really matter if they say, oh, you are a foreigner? Well, yeah, you are a foreigner, but you can use that language. Not that many people can use that language, and having learned
there
it
was a
later
strategy
on.
of our violin teacher, my children. She said, do you understand? I mean, not so many people can play violin.
Exactly.
So
you
yes,
are part
empower.
of that's right. It's great to know something. Even know it imperfectly is better than not knowing it at all. So don't give up languages because you've got a bad score.
Absolutely. The title of one of your research papers, Native Speaker, Why the Mythical Native Speaker Has Mud on Its Face.
Yes.
I know the problem. Parents, this is a common question of the parents, especially in bilingual schools, or no, just in, I'd say in any foreign language teaching. Is your teacher a native speaker? But can you please tell us about this research?
Yes.
I know
I think that there is...
is a native speaker always better teacher?
Yes, but this is a profound, I would say, ideological problem. That, in fact, that's why I avoid using the word native speaker. And that's why, we put it between brackets and we say, we call it the mythical native speaker. And we say has mud on its face, because in fact it's kind of, it turns students off when they realize that they will never sound like a native speaker, and it turns teachers off who are teaching a foreign language and they are not. I prefer using first language users of that language, because it is a deficit perspective overall, that you have a category of native speakers and you have a category of non-native speakers, and you will never become, I'm a so-called non-native speaker of English and I will remain a non-native speaker for life. I think that it's kind of stupid to label somebody by what that person is not. So I prefer talking about, I'm a foreign language user of English. That's okay. People straight away hear that I'm not a first language user of English, but I'm a first language user of French and Dutch, though some English words might even crop up there. And I think that that foreign language teachers who are not first language users of that language can be great teachers.
Sometimes can be better.
They can be better. I mean, there are things that they may be better at, and there are things that they may not be quite as good at. And there is, of course, huge variation. But I think that there is, typically in Asia, there is this native speaker is used for commercial ends, right? Yeah. Our school has native speakers, hence, we can charge more. And then the poor teachers who are non-native speakers earn half of what the native speaker teachers have. I think that's grossly unfair. That is scandalous, because they all have their strengths and weaknesses. So I think you need to have to be a bit more enlightened about what native and non-native teachers can bring to the classroom.
Yes.
And of course, the native speaker will have a nice accent, and may know jokes or cultural things that the non-native speaker may not know, but then the non-native speaker may know more about the grammar or the difficulties that the kids may have in mastering specific aspects of syntax or grammar or pragmatics. So, yeah.
the very important for me, the topic or question on bilingual education in England. Just leave Wales now, so it's not in this country, in England. I understand the overall, the British might not be great in languages, but in my experience, quite a few people, even English monolingual speakers, they'd love their children to learn and acquire a language. I understand what you're saying. You mentioned, but then maybe, they're not that serious about it. But I hear stories. I hear people calling me all the time. I mean, we don't speak Russian, say, for example, in a family. Can you accept, admit our child? Okay, Russian is not French or German, but the thing is, I'd love my child to acquire Spanish. But it's just either it's not happening, there aren't many places, with effective language teaching. And I've been convinced for many years that part of the problem is the lack of modern effective methodologies or pedagogies in language teaching, that one and the main being bilingual education or content and language integrated learning that proves to be so effective in many countries and been around for decades. So I kind of think London is where probably the majority of people using English as a second language, as their L2. It should be heaven for language learning and teaching. So it's clearly the government is not committed, or society in general, though I'd say, the politicians, to introducing bilingual education model. It could be as a, there's an extra, not in every school, a model of bilingual education to this country. Mm-hmm. So, and considering that content and language integrated education model is proven to be so effective. It's not just about fluency in spoken language and literacies in both or even 3 languages sometimes, but it also a great advantage for both a minority and majority speakers. Academic achievement. It's been research done mainly in America. So. Unfortunately, it's not happening, but it's on the rise. I mentioned to you before, but there's a Portuguese bilingual school, there's a Spanish bilingual school. It's great.
Good.
So yes, it's a positive. This school's already here. So this is a great opportunity for the government and people to draw on the experience, and they don't need to do anything. I mean, they're already here. Yet it's not visible. So. What do you think? I mean, the history of bilingual education, or complete void of bilingual learning in this country? Yeah.
Well, it's not just in this country. It's a pretty universal thing. That there always is a large amount of untapped potential. Because I would say that all these people in all these countries who all speak different languages, and yet these languages are often not very visible or are discouraged at school. Though you can do your GCSEs in Spanish or Chinese or Russian. So I mean, at least there are some possibilities, but I totally agree with you that it is insufficiently encouraged. And I think that it's the same political reason in every country. It is that, outside of the UK and the United States, Australia, English is seen as a useful language for economic purposes, but that other languages are pretty useless in an economic sense.
But that's not right.
No, of course it's not right. No,
people prefer if someone is speaking another language plus English plus another.
And in the European Union policy is that you typically need your mother tongue and 2 foreign languages, and that it is useful to have English as one of them, but that you also need another foreign language. If you live in the Alsace, for example, well, English is useful, yes, but knowing German is useful too, because that's what the people speak just across the border. So I think we shouldn't just focus on the big global languages for foreign language teaching. And but politicians feel that that's an argument that doesn't work too well. So, you know, Merkel, even Merkel, I admire her political career and skills, but she, at some point she said that multiculturalism had failed as a policy. And
I think that's been the discourse subject in this country as well.
Yeah, and then obviously it's because politicians realize that it doesn't quite work, or that it is easier to sell the argument that immigrants should speak German and forget their home languages, rather than say, well, why shouldn't all Germans maybe learn some Turkish or learn some Arabic? Wouldn't that be great? And you know, in my utopian society, that would be the case. The majority monolingual kids would learn the minority languages of the major minority languages in the country. You know, it shouldn't necessarily be up to GCSE level, but at least that everybody can express themselves basically in England, in I don't know, in Hindi. Wouldn't that be great? Or in Arabic or Russian, or you know, any of the languages, or Polish.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't that be useful? So, and that would, I think that would be such a huge shift in the mentality, and children would understand that, in fact, you know, we respect and appreciate the languages and the cultures of the minorities in this country, and we make an effort to communicate with them in their language. That would be great. But I don't think politicians dare to go there, because they feel that they would lose
destroy their national.
Yeah. So they say, yeah. I mean, elite bilingualism is fine, and you know, maybe
in top private schools.
In top private schools, and my child knows Mandarin and Russian and French. And isn't that great? But yeah.
Also, just talking about again bilingual education, especially primary schools. I'm thinking about different motivational factors in primary school children and secondary school children. Mm-hmm. So, if an adult or teenager, you might use this, you know, factor of employability. If you, as a motivational factor, if you speak that language, you will get, you know, better jobs. But in primary school, I think it's very different. You can't use that language with, you know, you can't use.
I mean, the children won't be convinced by that.
Yeah, there won't be. The children, absolutely. It won't be a persuasive argument. So, but the main motivation for young children is the environment, really, is it not? You know, the social environment. The other children and speak the same language, and they're most of the same culture. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this very children then can take their languages to, you know, do GCSEs and A-levels. Yep. But clearly some people understand, it's just not happening.
Yep. No, it's really about creating a positive loop where children feel that it is cool to know that language, and that they are with like-minded friends at school and family members and teachers, and that in fact it's exciting to be learning something interesting and new, and that can foster long-term interest and motivation.
And I believe that links to the very secure sense of bilingual identity. Yeah. You know, I'm a French, English, or Belgian, or Spanish, English, living here in this country.
And I also think then that if the first contact with the foreign language is not a positive one, it might be lost from the start. Yeah. So the kid who is forced to go to language classes, you know, 1 or 2 hours a week, and the teacher is not much fun, and they make fun of the teachers among themselves, you know, this is never going to work. Yeah. And then in fact it creates a negative image in the mind of the child that will be really hard to overcome.
Absolutely, yes, I agree with you. Fascinating. So the last part of our talk or interview, it's in fact about your own research, just a little bit more, and research in general in the field of applied linguistics. So you've done quite a lot of research into emotions, in emotional factor in the classroom, effect on personality. So the English language enabled it to visit my pain. Exploring the healing role of a foreign language in survivors' sexuality persecution.
I just corrected the proofs of that paper today.
Have you? Oh, yes. Okay. Or is
it
another?
Hasn't come out yet.
Oh, it hasn't. Yes, this is one of the. Yeah, that's absolutely. Is teacher happiness contagious? A study of the link between perceptions of language teacher happiness and students' self-reported attitudes and motivation. And this is my favorite, the last two, well, at least the title. British bollocks versus American joke. Do native British English speakers swear more or differently compared to American English speakers? And this is absolutely my favorite, the emotional weight of I love you in multilingual languages. Can you just expand on this?
Yeah. Well, a couple of these papers look at the emotional resonance of words and expressions in multilingual languages. And it turns out that typically emotional words and expressions in the first language of multilinguals typically have more power, more resonance than the words that they learned in languages that they acquired later in life. And what the idea is that the emotion words are more strongly embodied in the first language, meaning that a swear word that, you know, if I said a Russian swear word, it might sound like a funny word to me. It would be profoundly offensive to you. And you would react by, you know, you would react physically. And for me, it's just a funny word that I may have learned at school or come across in a book. So it means that even multilinguals who are really proficient in their different languages, they still react more strongly to emotion words and I love you in their first language. That was the finding, it sounds more profound in the first language.
So what language do you declare love for your wife? Dutch or French?
Dutch.
Or you have?
Dutch.
Dutch.
Yes.
Is the first? Oh,
yeah, because
okay.
we I mean, Dutch is my early second language, so that worked. And that's in fact also one of the things we found, that it is not an absolute rule, meaning you can fall in love in a foreign language, and then that becomes your language of love, and that language can become highly emotionally full of multimodal connotations. So you fell in love in English, so it means that English is for you the language of love, which doesn't mean that Russian has lost its emotional resonance, but for love, I guess it would be more English.
Okay, very.
And so there is a consequence of this is that in psychotherapy, if you talk about things that you have been traumatized in a language, that talking about the traumatic events in that language can be too painful. Mm-hmm. And so one way to avoid that and still talk about these issues is to use a foreign language where it gives you distance and detachment, and you can talk about it without feeling devastated by telling the experience. And so that's one of I have a couple of papers.
This is another strand of your research, is it linked to
multilingualism and psychotherapy.
Psychotherapy.
Trying to raise the awareness of psychotherapists that their clients might code switch for strategic reasons, and what it means and why it is useful to allow them to code switch if necessary. And again, training for psychotherapists typically does not include anything on multilingualism. Yet they are bound to have, you know, refugees who may speak English quite well, but it's to talk about the weather, not necessarily about how they feel and their profound emotions and how that is linked to their sense of self, etc.
That's a very useful research.
Very useful. And so the paper about English allows me to visit my pain is about people, 3 participants who were tortured in their home country because they were homosexual, and they torture apparently shatters your sense of self. So they were really, and then they were refugees, they went through the asylum process. It was terrible. They were in a charity in London called Room to Heal, where they met my PhD student who was a voluntary cook there, and she interviewed them and talked to them about their languages, and then they explained that in fact English allowed them to talk about things that they could not talk about in their first language because they were too painful, and that English also allowed them to reconstruct a new identity, a new self, where it was okay to love a same gender partner, and so it's a very touching topic. I mean, just looking at what these people said, you know, with
very important. Yeah.
This is quite something. Yes, this is very important. And we focus on psychotherapists, but in fact, the same applies to service providers who need to know that somebody is maybe using English as a second or third or fourth language, and that the fact that the person makes mistakes in English doesn't mean the person is stupid. You know, so some basic things, or like police interviews. If you are interviewed by a policeman in your foreign language, you're very anxious, you're stressed out, you may say the wrong things and you may incriminate yourself. So the policeman
in court.
So the policeman, the whoever is in charge, needs to be aware of these issues. That's really important for justice, really.
Yes, absolutely. Carry on this research, please. We need that. So, Jean-Marc, how difficult to get funding nowadays in the area of applied linguistics in general? And does it have to be? Does it researchers need to have direct and instant application? So something blue sky research.
Yeah. the thing is, I have never applied for big grants, because the things I wanted to do I could typically do without much money.
As a research method, you use questionnaires quite a lot.
Yes, so, I've always used questionnaires, and they are pretty. That's a cheap and easy way to collect lots of data. So I've never needed tens of. Well, I had a grant from Euronews once, £26,000. And that allowed me to collect some interesting data. But that's the biggest grant I ever got. Because chasing grants, I don't have enough time to chase grants and then to administer them. And I hate administration. I much prefer writing papers.
That's it. And how about quantitative research? What dominates at the moment?
Yes. All my PhD students, I'm saying this proudly because my 28th got her PhD a couple of weeks ago, and I have 9 more to go.
Wow, congratulations.
And almost all of them have used mixed methods. So
That's a good thing?
Yes. I like them to collect quantitative data, run statistics on them, and then also interview some of the participants in depth about the topic that they are investigating, and then combine both the quantitative and the qualitative findings, because the qualitative findings can shed light on possible causes of statistical patterns. So you can find that, you know, one variable is linked to another variable, but you don't, you know that statistically that's true, but you don't know why. So you need to talk to people in order to find out why that might be the case. And then when you interview people, they come up with amazing things that you would never have expected. Just like the research with Sally on her on her refugees, you know, the things they tell you are things you could not have expected. So that was a purely qualitative paper, but so I have my students collect data from 200 or 300 or 1,000 participants, and then they talk to 10 or 20, and then they combine both data sets. That's the kind of research I like most.
Yes,
so you hear the participants' voices.
Yes, absolutely. How difficult, or how would it be difficult to find a school who actively welcomes research in different area, but say, let's say applied linguistics?
Well, schools are very busy. And I understand that, and teachers are stressed out, and so they don't like seeing researchers too much. Head teachers are often suspicious that you know that their students might not be as good as they hope they are, and then it's a nightmare to obtain ethical approval. I mean, the process of getting ethics approval for schools, especially if you have under 16s, it's laborious and hard. And so I've done it a couple of times, but it's not my favorite. So that's in fact why I focus on 16 plus rather than children. But you know, if I have a student who wants to focus on primary school multilingualism or bilingual schools, then they are most welcome to do so. But they need to be prepared for some ethics procedures to go through.
Yes,
and that's
fine.
I'm not
procedures. This is
well, and I'm not criticizing them. You know, they're there for a reason, and it's important to have them. But it does make the research a bit more laborious.
Yes, of course. Okay, so the last few questions.
Ja.
I mean, let's go get the last
Shall we finish with a vodka?
Yes, I guess so. We need a drink. Okay, few questions. How would you convince the British policymakers to invest in bilingual education in this country?
I wish I knew. I wish I knew.
I wish I. Okay, that's fine. That probably would be my answer as well. Your recommendation to a foreign language teacher in an English mainstream school. I think you actually kind of answered.
Make it fun.
Make it fun.
I mean, make it fun. Make it relevant. And convince the kids that it's worth it. You know, because there are wonderful things out there, and I'm just opening this window and look what lies behind. You know, isn't that amazing? I mean, it could be dance, it could be Korean martial arts, it could be funny songs, it could be naughty drawings. You know, there are so many interesting things there. And I'm just opening the window and look out. And make your own choice. I'm not forcing you, I'm just showing you. I think if you had that attitude, that might work better than sit down and take worksheet number 1.
Another 50 words.
Yeah, because you know the test is coming up and you need a good score because our school doesn't want to fall in the league tables.
Absolutely. Okay, do you feel better? Or do you prefer swearing in Dutch, French or English?
It depends. It depends.
Depends. All three.
Yeah. No, I can swear in all three. Yes.
Okay. This question from my partner actually. What language do people dream in or talk in their sleep?
Yeah. Typically the languages that they are exposed to during the day.
But I thought it was in deep thoughts. You don't really think in any particular language.
No, but if you dream,
okay.
No, you can think without words. Obviously, I mean, if you're an artist, if you're a musician, you don't necessarily think about that in words. If you're a linguist, you tend to think in words a lot. But what you dream in, I would say I dream in 3 languages. You know, and I may sometimes dream about stuff in Spanish, and I think, well, why was I dreaming in Spanish? But maybe it was because I watched something on Netflix in Spanish, or I read something in Spanish, and then that language might crop up in a dream. But the thing is that you can't really do research on that, because you're mostly unaware of the languages that go through your mind.
Yes,
in
that
your
was a
sleep.
very interesting research.
Yeah.
Okay, a question from our daughter. Which 2 languages is the worst mix?
Which of the is the worst mix?
Is the worst? Which 2 languages is the worst mix? They could be quite upsetting for some people, but
you see, that's the kind of question that a linguist would never answer.
No.
Because there are no good or bad languages.
Absolutely.
There are no good or bad social acts. I mean, it depends on who is using it, with whom, where, when.
It's like with accents.
And
there's
how
no
drunk
right
are
or wrong
they?
accents. I guess.
Yeah. So it is a typical thing that my first year bachelor students say, that, you know, oh, sir, I only speak English and I speak it badly. And then I say, how can you claim you speak it badly? I understand you perfectly well. But they have this idea that somehow they don't have the right social act, you know. And I said, well, you have the social act you have, and that works fine for you, right? So don't feel guilty about not speaking your language well enough. You do use it well enough. You know, of course you could expand it, and, you know, you may develop your academic English, but don't say about yourself that you are bad at a language. That's not necessary.
No. Okay, the last, so what would you say to a multilingual and multicultural couple at the beginning of their family journey?
Well, yes, that's a difficult one. That they should not underestimate the difficulties about talking about themselves and their emotions in a foreign language, if they are both using a lingua franca. I think it is also important if one of the partners is using the first language of the other partner, that the other partner should realize that this might not be easy, especially at the start, and that there are cultural practices that need some time. Acculturation doesn't come from one day to the other. So, for example, I remember we had in one of the studies on I Love You, was it I Love You? It was an intercultural couples talking about the difficulty of communicating their emotion, and one of the participants was a Japanese lady married to an English man. And she said that he did not understand her silence. That when she was angry, she would go silent, because that's a very Japanese way to express anger. So you don't explicitly say so. And she complained that Westerners verbalize their emotions too much. That in an Asian context, you read the emotion in your interlocutor, but you don't use words, and that Westerners and Australians, you know, they say I love you all the time, and it's childish to an Asian. So I would say realize that this, you know, some participants also said, oh, it didn't matter, sex was enough. Sex was the lingua franca, and by the time, you know, we more or less managed to exchange some words, and that was okay. So yeah, but at some point there will be some negotiation or some understanding about different behaviors, both verbal and non-verbal behavior. Like, you know, do you smile? Or how much do you touch? So if you don't touch or you don't smile, does it mean you don't love me? There is risk for misunderstanding. So it's good to have a serious conversation about, in fact, intercultural pragmatics and cultural conventions.
Yes, that would be very interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, and also with the children, when of
Yes.
course that when the same couple, started the first child, and there will be more challenging but more exciting, I guess, journey ahead.
And it can even happen in monolingual couples where you think you agree on most things until you have a child, and then suddenly one thinks that the child should do this and the other thing, no, you don't push the child into doing, and piano and ballet and martial arts, and give the child some breathing space. I mean, in any couple there can be this conversation, but of course then if one of the partners is religious and thinks that is an important part because it's part of the language and the culture, then it requires some good negotiation and adjustment. Yes.
Okay, the very last one, your recommendation. What book would you recommend on the subject of bilingualism, bilingual education, apart from yours?
Yes,
I certainly recommend your book.
I was going to say, of course, my book with Julia Fessman and Greg Porch, which we wrote because the three of us are parents of trilingual children.
Is that raising multilingual children?
Raising multilingual children. And we were talking about this at the conference and joking, saying, in fact, we hear these questions so often, wouldn't it be good to, in fact, put it on paper, and so if people ask us, should we do this, that, we say, just read the book. Because it's the only book that is about trilingual children, or more than 3 languages. But of course, the classic is Colin Baker, you mentioned him before, on bilingual education and what parents can do if they want to raise their children bilingually. That's probably the standard reference in the field.
And language and culture? That's an interesting
the link between language and culture?
I think one of the chapters, I think, is preparation. That will be published by Cambridge University Press. And that's part of language and what was identity and culture?
Identity and culture are always in the mixture. We don't necessarily separate them explicitly from language. They are really always bunched together. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We've been waiting for your visit for the past 20 years.
Thank you.
So, Jean-Marc, I'd like to present you a special gift of Azbuka Russian English School backpack. I know academics like you all use, they love using backpacks.
We
It's a bit bright.
Perfect.
It can be used for other things.
It's perfect. Thank you very much.
And there's something else inside. Thank you very much. You're always welcome.
Great.
And we are open to research.
Fantastic. Well, I will tell Li Wei, and I will think about students who may be interested.
Absolutely.
Perfect.